I'm Eddie Johnson, and we are at the ABA meeting in Lexington, Kentucky. And we have the privilege today to interview Brother and Sister Glen Davenport. And so we'd just like to get a little bit more information for the sake of those who are listening out there to find out a little bit more about his ministry and their life together. So, Brother Davenport, why don't you start off by giving us your testimony?
Okay, my name is Glen Davenport. I was saved when I was 14 years old. But prior to that, Carol's father had come into a place called Chestnut Hill, Tennessee. That's a little spot out in the country, not much more there than a church. But he was a pastor there, and he talked to me quite often about becoming a child of God. And I guess I was about 12 at the time. And then through 13, they had moved back to Florida. But I remembered him as the preacher who was the only one who ever talked to me about the Lord. Other people may have, but he was the one I remember. His name was D.M. Lord, Dawsey Lord. He pastored that church for about a year. And while they lived in Tennessee, Carol and I got acquainted. And I kept in touch with them some through the years as to what was happening. So I moved to Ohio, and the Lord called me to preach in 1968. And while I was on vacation, I stopped by the Lord's home and told him that the Lord had called me to preach and that I was going to go to school. And I actually thought I'd go to Springfield, Missouri for that. But when I got back home from vacation, President William M. Brown called me and said that he had gotten a call from Brother Lord about the school. So he contacted me about going to school, and that's where I started in 68. And the school, but at that time, was in Hamilton, Ohio. It moved to Monroe, Ohio. And I had worked with the young people all my life, all my saved life. And when I started in school, I thought that I would be going to Vietnam to work with the soldiers there. I wanted to be a chaplain's helper, but I wasn't really qualified for that. But when I started the school, I didn't know anything other than what songs were in the Heavenly Highway hymnal. So I sang all the time, but I knew every song in the book, knew nothing much about the Bible. And then something happened in my first year of school, and the president had to dismiss himself from the class. And he gave me his notebook and said, "Teach this class." I said, "Lord have mercy, I can't teach a class." He said, "Follow my notebook. You only have like 5 or 6 weeks to go, and just stay with the notebook and everything will be fine." So I stayed with the notebook, and the next year I had that class assigned to me, and I went on until I had 9 classes in every school year. I taught in every class. Sometimes we had our classes, first period class, finished before daylight. Drivers or students would be coming in with their headlights on when we had already finished our first class. But I stayed with them 12 and a half years. Started as a missionary, sponsored by Fairmount Baptist Church. Brother Henry Lee Smith was my pastor. And while some said I couldn't do it, Brother Henry Lee Smith encouraged me to do it. So I was in my junior year of seminary, I started a mission, and the mission did very well. It was called New Hope Baptist Church. At the time, it was organized in Dayton, Ohio. And then I moved to Kokomo, Indiana. And in Kokomo, I pastored for 10 years at the First Landmark Baptist Church. The previous pastor was Tom C. Hansen, and after me was Moose Jackson. So has later more history than that. But after that, I moved to Tennessee and started a mission there. It did well for a little while. And then through my family, we had a lot of health problems. And eventually my wife passed away. I was a caregiver for my wife, for her mother, and for my son. And so my wife and her mother both passed away. But while they were doing that, a lot of things were going wrong at church. I talked to the Lord about it seriously talk to the Lord about it. I just couldn't do everything that was required at the time. The church went down. I told the Lord how much I hated to see the church go down. And he told me he could fix it, but to fix it required a death. Not just one death, but two, and maybe three. So my wife passed away in March of 2013. And my mother-in-law passed away about 2 months later. So it's a hard thing to deal with. But during that time, I think my health went down some. And I'm brokenhearted today because I can't do what I was doing. Our houses in the area where I work and the church are far apart. It's a drive from one house to another. It's hard to do door-to-door visitation like I used to do because dogs run free. And I've been met several times, one time in particular, surrounded by Dobermans. There must have been 9 of them.
Oh, wow.
And all of them could stand and look right in the window of the car. I just honked my horn until somebody came out and got the dogs out of the way. And I talked to them to tell them what I was doing. But we have that kind of trouble. One time I was on visitation, took a young man with me. And it was dark when he came. His mother said, "Now don't you go out there and get shot." That was so funny. I laughed and laughed. That's somebody going to get shot on visitation. I don't mean to be mean about this, but I'm going to say, I swear. At the second house was a gunshot went off. We left that house and went to another street. That was funny to me. So that kind of work is just not as easy done as it used to be when I could go down the street and visit 100 houses in a day, which I used to do quite often. But my ministry has come more to writing. I love writing. I wrote my first thesis for my master's degree in Eastern Baptist Seminary. It was called 40 Years of Marvelous Things, something that I'd learned in the school. And then I did a verse-by-verse commentary on the book of Hebrews, and the sponsoring church voted to give me a doctorate degree on that. And since then, I just write. I just study and write every morning. I preached a sermon one time that said that Jesus was made intercessions for us. And I wonder just what kind of job does Jesus have, making intercessions for me? And so I looked through a few of the commentaries and found one that said that he sets appointments and gives counsel. I said to myself, Lord, can you set an appointment with me? And I had the opportunity to say what time I wanted my appointment to be, and I said 4 o'clock in the morning. And so I figured that time I'd be pretty much alone. I could talk with the Lord, tell him whatever I wanted to. 4 o'clock in the morning has been a very good time for me. And as I write, sometimes the Holy Spirit fills the room, and that's the only place in the world that I want to be. When the Lord speaks to me while I'm in my Bible study and when I'm writing, that's the only thing that matters to me. Sometimes I pray that the Lord won't let anything interfere with this moment. And it takes me all the way back to the day that I was called to preach. I worked at Dayton Tire and Rubber Company building tires for Firestone. Had a perfect day. Everything went so smoothly. And I cried about it all day because it was just me and the Lord. My arms are swinging every way because I'm building a tower. But I prayed that he wouldn't let anybody interfere with me. And I had a perfect day at work. But I told him if he wanted me to preach, is what I do. I'd start preparing my sermon now. And this was in January of '68. And it just seemed like the day that I was saved, it's just a burden came off of me. And I'm ready to go to work. The Lord knew how green I was. He knew that I didn't know anything. But I knew he could teach me because I said, that's what I want to do. So when I got in the seminary, I didn't pretend to know anything because I knew I didn't. I remember the very first test I had in Bible analysis. The first test had 100 questions on it. I missed one question. The question had to do with the 3 gifts that remain. And my reference, I put 1 Corinthians 31:13, something like that. And it was supposed to be in 13. So I got my numbers backward on it, made 95 on it. And I said to myself, I may have missed a question, but that's 95 things or 99 things that I've learned since I've been in seminary that I did not know before I came. Amen. And from that day, from that time, Bible study has been extremely important to me. Well, I didn't tell you this, but I think it's mighty important. After my wife passed away, I got married again. Married Carol, it was her father. I talked about it in the beginning, Dawson Ward. So we met when I was about 12 years old, probably. She's about 13 or 14. And after being in contact all this time, then after my wife passed away, then we got married. Been married a little over 4 years. And she's my biggest supporter right now. She's in even one of the books we've written, have her picture on it because she helped me to write it. And so anyway, it's the Lord's really been good and gracious in many ways. Would you like to say something?